Thank you. First of all, welcome to all of you. It is wonderful to see so many people in this room that want to hear about creating great APIs. Just a practical, this session is scheduled to last 90 minutes. We will try to reserve the last 15 minutes for questions, in case you have questions. And then we'll also be available afterwards in case you have some follow-up question. And you can hunt us down tomorrow as well. But we being myself, my name is Anders. I'm a developer from Microsoft. I actually got my CAL license back in '93, and that will mean next year I can call myself senior developer, having 25 years of experience. With me I have Nikola.
So hi everyone, my name is Nikola, and I'm also a developer from Microsoft, and I've been working with NAV for the last 10 years, and this is basically my 5th Tech Days conference, so it's a double anniversary. Yeah. And so we should start with the session because we have prepared a lot of content for you today. So, on the previous Tech Days and a few years back as well, we were showing you this slide. And this slide is summarizing all of the external web services that the NAV is integrating with. And you could have seen in the previous past years that we have been increasing the number of services that we have been integrated to. And this year, we are basically flipping this picture around. So instead of integrating to the other web services, we would like to be able to offer to the other web services to integrate to us. So basically, we have managed to turn the NAV into a backend that you can integrate to. So if this is NAV, and we are hosting it in the cloud, in the last year, we have built a set of APIs on top that you can use to integrate your solutions to. So now, an open question to all of you. What is the difference between a web service and an API? So what is the thing that makes an API different than the web service? And an answer to this question is basically two ways. So every API is a web service in the end, but the API should serve as a shield. So the first requirement that a good API needs to fulfill is that there must be no breaking changes. So once you deliver the API to the general public, you must not do any breaking changes in it, otherwise it shouldn't be called API. And the second important consideration is that it needs to be very simple to use. And this consideration goes together hand in hand with the consideration number 1, because if you make a complicated API, it's going to be really hard not to introduce any breaking changes, right? So we got our first users, and the Office has integrated to us. So right now we are serving as backend to the Office. There is a solution that just went live. It's called Business Center that we will briefly demo today. And tomorrow there will be a session that is going to demo it and explain it in a very high level of details. Then we have also managed to integrate the QuickBooks desktop through the microservice with our cloud offering. So we are able to pull the data from the QuickBooks desktop into NAV and vice versa, from the NAV to push the data into QuickBooks desktop solution. And lastly, we have managed to build a lot of cross-app scenarios. So for example, you are able to create from your calendar an invoice via web services. And we have also started to write native apps like Android and iOS apps that are using NAV as a backend through the APIs. And basically, this is where you come into the picture, because these APIs are also intended for all of you to build your integrations on top. So we would like you to write your own microservices, your own apps, and your own UIs. And one thing that is great about this conference is that every year when I meet all of you guys and talk about the different solutions that you do, I'm really amazed with the way how you're using our platform. So that's really, truly amazing. Now, everything that you write on top of the API stack is going to work for both on-prem and on SaaS. So you just need to change the endpoint, and your solution should continue to work, which is really a good offering that we can give. And because, as I said, there are no breaking changes, there should be no code merge and no upgrades that you need to do in your own solution. Since these are all web services that have been around for quite a while, you can use any language to code against it. So you can use C#, JavaScript, CIL if you're efficient with it. We have wrote a lot of wrappers, and also the modern development environment that was shown today is also supporting invoking web services. And while preparing for this session, I have learned that it's even possible to code in COBOL. So all of the languages are basically supported. Yeah. And so we would like you to leave this session today by, if you don't know OData and the REST API, we are going to do a basic introduction so you can follow. And then I'm going to show you some advanced concepts and some new capabilities that we got in OData v4. Then Hannes is going to demo to you the currently available APIs that we are shipping out of the box. Then we would like you to understand how the different endpoints are working. So what is Graph, which endpoints are available in SaaS, and how can you connect it with on-prem solution. And we will end with building your own APIs. We have also sneaked in a design patterns subject. And we will also talk about future plans. So what are we planning to build on top? So with this, I'm going to hand it over to Hannes to do an introduction.
Thank you, Nikola. So I will introduce you to REST and OData. REST was defined and introduced back in year 2000 by Roy Fielding, where he made a doctor dispute where he introduced that concept. And since that, REST have been taken up by every service almost. And they have implemented REST-based call using more or less their own interpretation, but still have the common way of doing that. The most important thing to know about REST-based call is that they are stateless, unlike the old service we had, the SOAP service that we have, where you could preserve state. Microsoft, we have our definition and interpretation of REST. It is called Open Data Protocol. That work started back in 2007, and currently we are on version 4. In this presentation, we have some links. I will, of course, not go to all of them. I think those 3 links are some of the best, especially if you are brand new and a bit uncertain about what OData and all that is. Please click on link number 2. And the good thing about TechDays is actually presentations are available afterwards, so you can take them and you can click. But what is OData in practice? It is get, post, patch, and delete. It had been nice if we just call it read, insert, and modify and delete. But get, post, patch, and delete. It's very simple. So here is a short example of how you can see a JSON of getting the company entity from our endpoint, an ID, a system version, the name and display name, and the business profile ID that we are exposing here. Now, before we go into the APIs, I will talk more into the endpoints, the URL we have. We have 2 sets, the one we have in our SaaS offering and the one we have on our prem. So in SaaS, you can call API invoicing office.net and version 1.0, and that version is referring to the version of the endpoint. Then follow, I want to have API. Then we have beta and the concrete entity. I will in the next slide talk more into versioning of the APIs. Similar for invoicing, as Nikola introduced, that we have the business center that is calling us because we are the backend for Office. If you want to call a tenant directly, you just add the tenant name in front of it. On-prem, it also works on-prem. It is just machine name, whatever port you're using, Dynamics NAV, the instance name, of course, API/beta, and then the entity that you are asking for. We will also talk more into later on how you enable APIs on-prem and what kind of authentication that are available with the different endpoints that we are showing here. As I said, I will return on the versioning. We are currently in what we call beta with our APIs. I will guess it is very unlikely that we'll break them. I'm quite convinced if we break them, Nikola and I will be called in the middle of the night, and we don't like that. But we will soon get an official version 1. So Microsoft is a big company, and we have process, and we need to have that versioning in Graph, and we just have to wait until we can flip it to version 1. But hopefully soon, we have been promised. When we have the versioning in place, then whenever we do, it's a breaking change, or when we create a new version of an entity API that will not be compatible with the previous one, then of course we'll create a new version and maintain that. And then previous version will work normally until you update your code. Now we come into getting some of the data now that we know what endpoint to call. It is get, this I have API invoicing office.net, but it will also be financials.dynamics.net, the API, the beta, and then there's something, a long thing. It's a GUID, it's a unique ID, and we want the keys to be canonic, and therefore they must never change. Because they must never change. Inside the app, we actually keep track of those ID even if you delete the entity. For instance, delete a customer. We just keep track of that ID used to belong to that customer. Yeah, again, most keys are represented here as GUID. So here, another important thing. If you are fetching a larger set of data, then of course we have a limitation that you only get, in a SAS at least, we've set that up to 1,000. You can only get the first 1,000 rows, and if you want more, you just need to fire a contingent link to get the rest of that set. Here I have some example on how you can get a list of invoices, a specific invoice, get the nested record. So normally an invoice is actually only interesting if that invoice also contains some lines, and that is a nested set. We also, if you want to get an entity using a more complex key or an alternate key, I will, after those few slices here, switch over to Postman, where I'll just fire a few Postman scripts so you can see how it fits data. When you are posting, creating data, you need to specify that the context type is application JSON in the header, do whatever authentication that you're planning to do, and then in the body you specify the fields that you want to create the customer with in this example here. If you also just take a short look at the URL, you can see that every entities are entities under the company. It's obvious that when you as a user log into your company, then you will see the customers for that company, and you can have several companies. The same logic is replicated here in the APIs. If you want to modify or delete data, we also have a very, very long, strong text here. An e-tag. So normally when you are developed towards traditional Navision, the server keep track of version of the record that you are working on. So if somebody else changed the customer while I'm working on that, you'll get this conflict. We are enabling that for the external developers by supplying an e-tag whenever they get a data, and they must preferably use a match on that when patching or deleting an entity. If you're just playing with the API, you can just do if matched asterisk. I don't care if others have changed, and that's easier. But it is good practice to take versioning into consideration when building an app. So now I'll just shortly switch over here to, if I manage to do this, this key. There we are. Nope. Nope.
Do you want to switch here?
Yeah, just switch there. So here I'm using the tenant-specific endpoint. So you can see M365, whatever, that's the name of a tenant I'm working on, and it is in SAS, so it's financialsdynamics.com. I specified the port, and then MS for Microsoft here. API, beta, and companies. And it is the companies that I want to see, so I just... And here you can see I have 2 companies on that tenant. Exactly just like building a page inside NAV and run it and see what's inside. And again, here you see the ID. So if I want to get a specific ID, specific company, then I just in parentheses put that key. And if I try to send this, you will see now I'll only get that company I requested. And then here another example of give me all the customers under certain company. And then you will see this long list of customers. Later we'll talk into that there aren't that many fields that you normally see on the customer inside NAV. Post. The only thing that is slightly different here is that in my request header, I just need to say that I'm sending this as JSON. And here I have the body where I can specify a display name. Let me see, developer 44, whatever that means. And here you can see the result that is coming back, the response. If you want to patch, I will only here say that it is the header that is important, that you specify whether you care about versioning or not. And similar, you can do request for getting invoices, and build on top of that. For that invoice, I also want to have the invoice lines. Let me see if this works.
The presentation is not running.
It's here somewhere. There we are. Sorry. Oh, and with this, I will give over to Nikola.
Thanks. So let's look a bit deeper in what is available out of the box. So in the last version, we have really enriched our OData v4 endpoint, and we have added a lot of new functionality to it. So for this part, I'm going to start with explaining the authentication to all of you guys, because without this one, we cannot start. Then I will show you how you can understand what the capabilities of the services are by reading the metadata. And we will briefly go over the data structures that are available. And then basically we are going to go through all of the new functionality that we have added, $expand, deep inserts. We will briefly touch up on the batching. Filtering, we have added actions. The actions are especially cool because this was the main limitation that we had on OData compared to SOAP, because before it wasn't possible to invoke the actions. And then we will go through the error handling and selecting a language. So, for the authentication, you have only 2 ways of authenticating against our web services. And the first one is the web service access key, and the second one is a bearer token. And an important thing to know is that the API is always running as a user. So both of these authentication methods are connected to the user. So the API call is going to have exactly the same permissions as the user has. And as well, if you're doing any logging on the username, then depending on the credentials of the user, we are going to store that in the NAV. So the first way of authenticating is the web service access key, and this one is the easiest to set up. So I'm going to just show you briefly how you can do that. So if I switch here, and here I have my cloud instance. So if you just navigate to a user's card, and you open the user, here you're going to get a web service access key. So if you want to expire it, you can just open it, and you can also change it and update it to a new version, new value, right? So how to use the web access key? It's very easy. So I'm going to copy it. And the second tool that we are using in general is Fiddler. It's similar to Postman, but some people would say it's a bit more geeky. So yeah, I prefer it because I've been using it more than I have been using Postman, so it's more like a preference. And the cool thing that we have here is a text wizard. So in order to use the authentication token, I have to base64 encode it. So I'm going to type admin : and a web access key. An important consideration is that you shouldn't have any new lines or any spaces because you see how it is changing. So if you have a return line or a space, the web service is going to reject the access key. So if I go back, okay, I have to close this one, and I just provide here the web access key, and now I'm able to call this tenant. A big limitation with web access keys is that you have to hit the URL exactly. So I have to know what is the address of this tenant before I can communicate with it. So if I execute the request, I'm getting the companies back. So the service has allowed me to interact with it. Now, for the second way of authenticating is basically bearer tokens. And this is also rather simple to use, but it requires a bit more setup. And the tokens are superior to the web access keys because they are containing information about the user. I'll demo this one quite shortly. So in order to get the token running, you need to get 4 pieces of information, and this is the hardest part. So obtaining these 4 points, that's the hardest part with using the tokens. And this is the example of C#, how you can actually generate a token. And as you can see, it's only 2 lines. On the bottom of the slide, we have put an excellent article. If you would like to get started, we really recommend that you just read it after this presentation from the slides itself. So basically, to show you how you can generate the bearer tokens, I have wrote a PowerShell helper that I'm usually using. And it's rather hacky because I just like the things that work. I didn't polish the code. So in order to get the token, it's the same code as we have in the C#. So we need users' credentials. We need under which authority we are authenticating. And then we are just invoking the same functionality as the C# does. I have also implemented that it copies it to the clipboard because that's what I'm using when I'm developing. So it's very easy to paste it back in the Fiddler. So if I just get the token for the user number 1, and if I go back to the Fiddler, in this text wizard, and if I put the token here, and now I say, please transform it from base64, you can see all of the information that is sending to the service. And right here, you can see under which account the token is going to authenticate against. And this is really enabling us to know which tenant you want to provision, which credentials it has, so we can know a lot of things by using a bearer token, so we can provide additional functionality for you. So if I would like to use the same thing here, then I would just need to change this basic to bearer and paste the token. And then if I execute the same web response request, oops, it doesn't work. So let's try here. Let's see if it will work. Yep. So basically, we were able to get the same response for the tenant. And you can see that here we don't know the tenant name, so we are hitting the forwarding service, which is based on the information obtained from the token, directing the call to the proper server. So back to the slides. So as I said, the tokens have a simpler authentication. If the user is logged in, you can just reuse the credentials. You don't need to store the web access keys and update them and do this kind of manipulation, so it's easier to manage. Then you can use the single endpoint with the tokens. And the cool thing that we have enabled with the single endpoint is that if you don't have a tenant, we are going to automatically provision one for you within 40 seconds. So an API call is going to lock, and when it returns, you will get a tenant setup. So it's very important when you're specifying the URL, are you going to say invoicing on financials, because that's the tenant that you're getting in the end. So we will either provision on financials or invoicing tenant for you. And each token has an expiration time, so it is easier to manage. If you revoke users' permissions, you don't need to go into the user card and then do the management of the tokens. And web access keys in general are quite good for prototyping. So it's, as you saw, it's just a few clicks. So if you would just like to get up and running fast, you should be using these. Then the second important concept that we are going to go into today is metadata. And this definition is pretty good. If you would like to learn about the service capabilities, there are two ways of doing this. One is reading the documentation, and the second one is $metadata. And $metadata is better because it is always up to date, right? It is based on the code that is currently running. And you can even see some things that we have recently implemented that haven't been documented yet. So if you invoke the call like this, as I did, we are going to return you what are the capabilities of this tenant here. And the metadata is being returned as an XML. I have a nicer view here. So if you take a look here, you can see that we are having some complex types, and nullable means that it can not be specified. Also, you can see the data types, maximum length, and which entities we have here, navigational properties, and various different stuff about the service. We will also tell you which fields are read-only, on which services you can insert, on which services you can modify, and additional information like this. So it is quite useful. Then, yep, this is how it is looking like, and this is the URL that you should use to obtain the metadata. Now, as you saw in the metadata, we are giving you which data types we have enabled. And in short, they can be categorized into three groups: entities, sub-entities, and complex types. And entities are main records like sales invoices, customers, and vendors. So that's where the main data is. Sub-entities are the dependent records, and they cannot live without the main records. In NAV, that would be a sales invoice line or dimensions. And as you can see, we can reuse one of the sub-entity on multiple APIs, which is really nice. And then the complex type is just a struct, which is reusable. And the cool thing about it is that, for example, when we have an address, we can have the same address format on the sales invoice, on the customer, and on the vendor, because in the end, it's the same information. Now, for a design question, which is constantly arising, when should you use the sub-entity and when the complex type? So there is a performance impact when you're using complex types because they're always loaded. You cannot easily exclude them from the response. And sub-entities can be accessed directly if needed. So you can just navigate to the sub-entity without accessing the main entity. But the complex type cannot because it just lives on the main entity itself. Now, complex type is updated in a single transaction. So if something fails, we will roll back the transactions, while for the entities, you need to do a different request if you would like to patch it. Yep. A new capability that we have also added are navigational properties. And in NAV terms, these would be payment terms, units of measure, or currencies that we could have on the sales invoices or on the customers. And they can be inserted or they can be expanded with $expand. So I'll briefly demo these. So the $expand is going to return you a value from the related record. So if we go back to the fiddler, and this is the new functionality that we have introduced. So, and if we say $expand, so, and I need to paste the token here. And if we would go here, and if I just fetch the sales invoices like this, and if I do this expand lines, so here you can see that there are no lines in the response, so I'm not getting them as related data. But with the $expand, they are included in the response. So you can fetch the invoice and the lines together. And basically, you can chain up as many navigational properties that you would like. You can get currencies, payment terms, and everything else that is specified in the metadata. Then for the next concept that we have, that's deep inserts. And deep inserts are also a data v4 functionality that we have recently added. And this allows you to insert in a single call the main entity and all of the navigational properties that it has. And the really cool thing is that it runs as a single transaction. So if something fails, we will roll back everything, so you don't need to manage the state. So for the example, we are going to insert the sales invoice with the lines. So if I would go back here, and I would go to my deep insert demo and paste the token again. So you can see that here I'm inserting a sales invoice. I have specified the customer and I have specified a line. So if I execute this request, I'm going to create an invoice together with the line. And this invoice now can be posted, which I will do a bit later. And then if I try to do an invalid deep insert, nothing is going to be created, and I'm going to get 404, which is really a benefit if you would try to first insert the header and then the lines, and then you would have to delete the lines that didn't succeed and header and mess with the data itself and the side effects that it could have created. Many people like the deep inserts a lot, and then they asked us, can we get the deep modify? And the answer is no, because it is not supported by the standard. And deep modifies would not really work. The reason why is because you need to specify concurrency token. So what if the concurrency is off for a single record that you're trying to modify, right? And you're not changing the latest version. It would really be complicated. And that should be fixed by the $batch. And with the $batch, as you can see, you can batch multiple requests and submit it to the service, and then service is going to take it one by one and process them. Unfortunately, with the current version, we only support a single write transaction within the change set. So the change set itself, it should be transactional, but unfortunately, we are not able to support this from the backend because we cannot guarantee that we will revert. Since in CL, you can hit multiple commit statements, and then we would have to lock the data while the operation is running, which would impact the availability of the service. So it is a rather hard problem. So we have allowed you to only do a single write within a change set. And I would advise you not to do the multiple writes in the multiple changes in the $batch, because then it's really hard to control what happened if something fails. So you can batch a single write and multiple reads. That would be a recommendation if you need to do that. Then we have a $filter, which is a cool functionality. So basically it behaves exactly the same as UI filter. And you can filter on the APIs. Since it is behaving the same as the UI filter, the same limitations are applying as in UI. Namely, you cannot filter on the calculated fields. That's going to be ignored. Also on the global variables, that's also going to be ignored. And no unions are supported. So you can say, give me everything that has a price of 100 or price of 200, but you cannot say, give me everything that has a price of 100 or is being sold in pieces, because that request is going to be rejected. So to show you an example of filtering, so here I have my own request, and I'm trying to get all of the invoices that are in draft states and are worth more than 100, including tax. So if I specify the bearer token and I execute it, I will receive back the filters list. And this is really cool if you're trying to build any kind of a UI or just fetch a single entity. Then, for the next thing that we have added is that now we are allowing you to read binary content. So you can fetch the invoices printed, you can fetch the images, and other things. And just recently, a few days ago, we have also implemented writing the binaries. But we will not demo it today. But basically now you will be able to push the binary content to the service itself by using the same approach. So to switch to the demo, to show you this one. Now if I go to the composer and I ask for the company information here, and I give my token, of course, I execute it. It looks like I clicked twice. And I'm getting, now I received the company information back. And here you can see that I have a picture. And the picture has a link. So if I just go up and I change this URL and I paste the picture, and I delete this media link before, and I execute the request. And if I say like row, no, image view, you can see that I got my company log. And you can use this API for getting items or customer pictures or anything else. Then we also have this functionality that you can get the PDF. I just need to get my token back. And if I replace this token here, and I do execute, and this one is basically returning a PDF, so I need to right-click it and say save response, response body, and I'll put it on the desktop. Did it save it? What?
You use a folder.
I use the folder. Okay, thanks. And here it is, invoice.
And thank you for being awake.
Thanks. Yes. And you can see that I got the invoice from my company with my company log, which is pretty cool. Now, and basically this is the best addition, in my opinion, that we did in the latest OData stack. So we have enabled you to use actions. And this was the biggest limitation comparing our OData stack with the SOAP, because in the past they were not able to invoke the action. And the first concept is bound actions, and they are bound because they are running on a single entity. And the metadata will tell you on which entity does the action belongs. So it has to run on a record. And to use it, it's very simple. I'll demo it in a minute, because you just need to invoke a post request without a body. And the namespace is microsoft.nav.post, and you shouldn't specify content type. And this is going to invoke an action. The limitation on this one is that no parameters are possible, and it can only return an entity back in form of the URL. So I'll show you this one in the demo. So if we go back, and I go back to the fiddler, and if I go here, and so just let me find the deep insert in French, make an invoice, metadata. So basically, let's just post the sales quote here. And here I'm going to say sales quotes lines. And I need to get a token again, because, yep, and I specify it here. And so this is a good thing that it occurred. So I got an error. So let's see what happened. And okay. So I did a silly thing here. So let's try now. So the quote got created, and now I need the ID of the quote in order to be able to invoke the action on it. So if I go back and I access this quote like this, and at the end I will say Microsoft.nav.makeInvoice. So I'm going to convert this one into the invoice. I need to delete this one, and I need to delete the body. and I'm going to execute it. And now this quote has been turned into an invoice. And here you can see that I got in the response the location of the invoice that I have just created. So if I copy the invoice itself, I can put it in the URL here. And just a second so I don't make any mistakes. And I delete this location. And I go to the end, and I go here. And now if I do a post request, yep, I'm clicking it twice. Now this invoice got posted, and I get the updated request. So you can see it's very easy to build these flows. You can just simply go from the quote into an invoice just by, the service is going to lead you by itself. The next, so I have demoed this one. And the next concept that we have are unbound actions. So this is the second concept that we have introduced. And the unbound actions are running as static. And you should think about it that it shouldn't run on the record, and it's global for the entire service. And unlike unbound actions, it can take parameters in, and it can return you a simple value back. And you can see this in the metadata. It is listed on the bottom. Unfortunately, these are not supported by the APIs. This is only OData v4 concept. So you can use it from your own extensions. You can simply publish a code unit as a web service, and it's going to pop up as an outbound action. And the interactions with the unbound actions are the same as they are with the bound actions. Now, a big question that we got when we were developing these APIs was, when should you use an action and when should you patch, right? And some developers implemented some things wrongly, so we had to go back and undo it. So a question for all of you guys, should this interaction be an action, or should we just simply modify a record through the patch? So the first interaction is posting an invoice, and the second interaction is accepting a quote. And if you're not familiar with this functionality, it's going to flip the accepted field to true, and it will set the accepted date. And the answers to these are that the first one should be an action, and the second one should be just a patch request. And the guidance for this is that you should use patch whenever you can simply patch the entity back. If you cannot patch the entity back, you should use the action to notify the developer that this change might be irreversible. Also, patch shouldn't modify the other entities within the same request, while the action can modify as many entities as it wants. So for these reasons, posting an invoice is an action and patching the quote is not. If you introduce an action where you should use patch, you're basically introducing additional complexity, which is not really needed for these kind of scenarios. Now, also very important question is the error handling, and this error is the best internal web server error. If you're not familiar, this means that service cannot really tell you what went wrong, right? So we improved the error handling in the latest release. And to tell you a story around this one, we were working together with the Office devs, and every Office developer is going to start the integration story with, please give us the list of the errors that the service can return. And when we tell them that the NAV can potentially raise 1,000 errors and that you guys through the extensions can add even more, they are really puzzled. And then the next question is, okay, but which ones are occurring most often, right? And then we have to tell them we don't really know, right? Because that's really hard to tell. So in order to fix this one, we have categorized them. And we have introduced the following categories. The bad request means that you're doing something wrong. The request that you're forming is not valid. And then you're going to get the message why. Authentication means that you didn't specify the authentication well. Authorization means that basically you don't have correct permissions. Internal means that we got some unexpected errors on the service. It may be valid or it may be invalid. And application means that you have hit AL errors. Please don't read this slide. You can come back to it after the presentation if you download the slides. These are user-friendly error codes that we recommend that you can take straight from the error message and show directly to the user, which is the same thing that we have recommended to the Office devs to do. So if you get this error code back, you can just simply reflect it in the error message, Otherwise, show a message, an error has occurred, please try again later, or whatever the correct wording is. On this topic, we have a full list of error codes. I think there is around 40 or 50. So if you would like to look into it, you can after the presentation. Now, a really cool thing that we also got is selecting a language. So if you would like to flip the language under which the web service call is running, it's very simple. You just need to decorate it with accept language in the header and specify a valid language. And then it behaves exactly the same as NAV does. If we have this language, we will return you the text into this language, otherwise we'll just use English. And this is equal to the AL word which says global language, and then you put an ID. So, and it is only during an API call. After the API call, it's going to be rolled back. So for the demo, I can show you this one as well. So if I go here, and I want an error in French, and I paste a token. Nope, I don't have a token. Give me a token. Yep. And I got an error back. It's a nice thing in demo when you're trying to invoke an error, right? So you can see that we got this code, internal invalid table relation, and then I got a message in French. So this is really enabling you to reuse the error messages and texts. If I would try to print a report, the report that I would get back could be in French as well. So there are differences between the API and OData v4 endpoints. And why is this? Is because API is being exposed to Graph, while OData v4 is being exposed to all of the existing developers. And also OData v4 was the first thing that we implemented, so we had a lot of dependencies that we couldn't easily change. So there are slight differences between the APIs, and you can expect that in the future as well, it can behave a bit different. So API is auto-published, and you cannot change it with the extensions. It is written in stone, more or less. You can do OData v4 extensions. URLs are a bit different. In OData v4, we call it company. That's the main URL. In API, it's companies. And there is a slight difference in response on these APIs. As I said, the outbound actions are only on OData v4. And for the namespaces, in OData v4, we use NAV dot something for legacy reasons. And for API, it's Microsoft in front. And this is important because we need to integrate to Graph itself. So to show you two quick demos. So for the first demo, I'm going to show you an integration that the Office team did. So you can see these APIs in practice. So if I go to the Office site and I need to log in, let's hope that I didn't make a mistake. Let's see. No. So what happened with this tenant? Okay. I got a different site, sorry. And if I click on this business center, so when it loads, I will be able to demo you which parts of the business center are using APIs. So Business Center is a solution that was developed with Office, which is supporting you to do multiple things like invoicing, bookings, connections. And there will be a session tomorrow about it, which will cover it in details, so I will not go into much details. And it's the last session of the day, so if you're interested, join that one. And here, these totals are actually coming from invoicing through the API call. And as you can see, if you're using this solution, you're going to be quite successful. This customer has made a lot of money, right? So, also these pages that we have built here, invoices, they don't look anything like NAV pages, and they are also being run on the API stack. And unfortunately, I cannot demo this one to you if you don't have invoicing already. When you get to this page, it's going to ask you if you would like to get the tenant. And then if you click a button through the API call, they're going to provision a tenant for you within 40 seconds. So if you would like to try it out, you could see the full experience itself. And for the second demo that I have prepared, so let's see if how this one will work, is that here in the invoicing app, which will also be demoed tomorrow in a high level of details. Let's see. Yep. So let me just log in. Nope. So while we are waiting to log in, here, basically, I have written a really quick script to transfer the customers from one tenant to another. So it is very simple in PowerShell. So if I have a payload from one customer, I can just use the invoke REST method to post it. So you see, this is a brand new tenant here. Oop, I got the wrong URL, so I need to fix it. So what's happening? So just, sorry, this one shouldn't happen. This is usually happening during the demos, right? Mm. So if I take this thing, and I take the URL, and then I take chess gifts, and since I'm already logged in, it should automatically forward me to the correct one. Yep. And it's trying to do a guided setup. I'm not interested in this. And you can see the tenant is completely blank. It has no customers in it. So if I invoke my PowerShell script, and this one is now going to start running. So let's see if it will be successful. I managed to transfer a customer. And I have a bug in the script itself, so I need to delete it, right? This was for testing purposes. So let's try it again. And now this customer list should start growing. As you can see, I can automatically script the things around by using APIs. We are using these a lot by providing a specific setup. So if we would like to create a demo environment or to generate a large amount of data, it's very easy to write these kind of scripts. And I also have a script that I'm using to check the health of the test tenant that we are developing, because it is also very easy to automate through the PowerShell. Okay, so that was all of the demos that I had for today. So I'm going to hand it over to Hannes to show you which APIs we are shipping out of the box.
Good, thank you, Nikola. So the APIs that we are shipping out of the box, we have, for a long period of time, want to have a set of pages and APIs that can be exposed by external services. And finally, we got the chance to build that stack for this release. So when we start figuring out what we want to build and what deep and breadth we need to build, we of course do what everybody else do. We look at what our competitors are doing. So there's a lot of big American online services, Zero Stage. We also have a lot in Denmark. We also looked at some of the one in Holland, and I think 2 in Germany and 1 in Belgium, to see what they are offering off the page. And many of those competitors, they are in the smaller market segment. So that will mean the only customization model they actually have, that is their API stack. So we saw what they need to build for other services to be able to connect to their ERP system, and we have tried to build the same ourselves. So we are part of the bigger Microsoft group, and we are working on APIs. We'll later talk shortly into graphs. So of course we also have to do some unifying around namings. I think there are also sessions here around CDS and CDM. This have nothing to do with this. This is just purely API here. And so we need to align the names. We need to have the set of entities that our competitors have or similar. And then some of those NAV internal fields, we need to not expose them for now. So that is also being able to have and maintain APIs. If you start by filling in the whole stack, there's a risk that you do something wrong and by all the fields, and thereby you need, when you're fixing that, you do a breaking change. It is way easier as they get requested to add additional fields here. And of course, we will balance that expansion against with simplicity. Another thing that is important for being simplicity is, imagine that if you're doing payroll or whatever, you're an expert on develop a payroll system, and now you want to hand back some finance transaction to an ERP system. You don't want to read a long book. You just need to see where's the door, how do I kick in the pack, and slam it again and say goodbye. Because my focus on developing a great payroll experience, for instance. So again, we are in beta with our APIs. We do take the versioning very serious, even though we are in beta. We are just waiting for flipping the flag to be 1.0. When an API get a version, it will stay like this, and we will support it forever. Nobody will say forever in software, but for a long period of time, and if we need to deprecate some, we'll give heads up with all the normal policy we have here. Another important thing is, now we are in Europe, so you know we release NAV in different versions, but we also release them, should we say, in a different flavor. So if you take a French data schema and compare that to a Belgian, I know that at least there's one field that is different. I think the enterprise number in Belgium, where it is in the rest of countries, we only have VAT registration numbers. All those local flavors, we haven't kind of figured out how we're going to nail this down right now. And we will see if we need to do it. The advantage of having this common API is, again, if I do payroll in Denmark, then if I can do it in Germany as well, I don't have to think about if that customer is located in Denmark or Germany. When I integrate, I just use the same set of APIs. Right now, it's not possible to modify and extend the APIs, the standard APIs, but if you need to, you can develop all the APIs you want to have for integrating to a special service you have that will grow the business together with you. So if I give some more details on how that, for instance, the customer API, I looked it up the other evening. I think in W1 we have 89 normal fields in the customer tables. We definitely not have that many fields in our APIs. We have, I think, around 15 or 20. A few things that's important to be aware of. We do not use abbreviation in our APIs, so that means that NO is number spelled out. And then we have to align to Microsoft naming, so when we say a name, it is a display name, probably in an app built by somebody else. All the complexity that many of you are deep expert in, like dealing with the posting group, invoice discount code, and whatever and whatnot we have on the customer table, we don't expose this. We will, however, have some templating behind our customer API, so when you create an API, the bookkeeper can control what default values various fields will get there. So here is the set that is pending to get version 1 in the graph. I will not go into each of the individual APIs. Actually, when I learned Navision, then I learned Navision the hard way. Here you have the customer, here you have all the fields. Here you have the item, here you have all the fields. You are clever, you can look it up, so if you need to. But I think some of the most important APIs, there is actually something as simple as the journal and the journal line. Imagine that you are doing an app where you do something, again, like payroll or outsourcing, for instance, warehouse and all that, and you just from time to time from that software need to report things back to the ERP system to keep the books up to date. That's very important. So you could just call the API, flush it in, and if you give that permissions to that user, they can also post it using a bound action. A little thing that we haven't advocated that much, we have also exposed the employee. That's a very old entity we have there, and the only reason why I want to talk into now is that we have also made it possible for posting against employee inside NAV. So if I have some expenses and that will end up, the company will owe me $200, you can register that in the journal and you can see that under the employee. So that is also some of the things we have been doing while we have developed the APIs. Documentation or metadata, trust code. And of course, a hint, we are not using namespacing inside NAV yet. We are not completely modern there with our classic development experience, but the object range, it is there for reference. The graph, I will briefly talk into it. The graph is invented by Office, and Office are not shy. They have the endpoint to rule them all. There's a link here to get started with the graph. Imagine that a user, Susan, have access to the Office online and there's a lot of product. Now also she's most likely hired in a company and she's working with contact customers, items and invoice and so on. Imagine if you want to build an app exposing those resources that Susan have created using the other apps inside the Office family. It would be nice if there's one endpoint where you can fetch them all. That is available. So we have the graph single endpoint. Please notice in the bottom of the namespacing here, I think we have, if you call it with financials, it will redirect you to our single endpoint for the SaaS offering. And again, if you are logged in and sign in using OAuth, AAD authentication, it will of course pick up the right tenant and find all the details that you want to fetch from that tenant, or from Office, or from CRM, if they have exposed those entities. This is a slice for reference. Please, the important thing to notice here is the difference amongst endpoint and the fact that when you go home, get hopefully NAV 2018 soon, install that. APIs are disabled out of the box. Nikola will talk into how we enable it. It's rather simple, but it was a decision we took so we don't expose a company's data through API unless they give consent. The endpoint are also slightly different, but besides from that, it more or less work the same. And I also think we will try to improve that experience for the on-prem and access the endpoint in Tenerife time frame. Oh yeah, so our APIs, the naming, display name for instance, we are in review with the graph team. We go to every field, explaining what it do, and we talk about how it should be named. Oh, will you talk into enabling endpoint on?
Yes, thanks, Hannes. So, basically, for enabling APIs on-prem, as you already heard, the API is disabled by default. There was a lot of discussion, should it be enabled or disabled, but we felt that it wouldn't be right that we enable something out of the box, so users might be sharing more than they wanted. Because this list of the data that we share is quite long. And it's very easy to set up the APIs on-prem, so you just need to enable the OData web services, and then in the administration console or in the config, you just need to change the Enable API Services checkbox. There is an action in UI that you need to run to make sure that all of the data is set up, and you need to set up templates. So these are the 4 steps that you need to do it. So I'm going to demo how to do this. So in short, in the server config here, this is more geeky way of doing this, you just need to flip this value to true. And now I would need to reset the server. Oops. So let's go to the services. And if I find Microsoft Dynamics NAV server, so I just need to reset it. And while that one is happening, I will just start the Windows client that I have on my box.
Whoa. Hello.
Yes,
It's still working.
it is.
Cool.
And now the server is cold, so it will take some time to load. And really good thing about the... So it looks like I haven't saved the URL, so I'll have to wait until it loads. Or did I? No, I didn't. So let's just wait until the client loads. Hopefully this will warm up the server. And now if I go to the API setup page, and it's here. And this is the page that you need to use for setting up the APIs. The first action that you should run is this one, which is called Integrate APIs. And this action is going to go in the background and generate a lot of integration records, fixed references, and navigational properties. So it might be a quite lengthy action to run. So don't do it during the office hours, definitely, because it is also locking some records in the tables. And the second thing that you might want to do is that you might want to set up templates. And here you can see the rule pattern that we have applied. So if you would like to specify how the customer templates should be applied, we are going to follow the order. So when you give a JSON to us, we'll look which fields you have specified in the JSON. And then we are going to iterate through templates one by one, trying to find the first one that matches the criteria. So here you can see that I'm applying the foreign template for everybody who has a currency code different in UK. This is definitely wrong, it should be a country code. Otherwise, I'm applying a domestic template to the customer. And now just to because we have enabled it, to get the URL, you just go for the web services. And we wait for this one to load. Come on. And here you just take any URL. And then you just delete a lot of stuff here. All the way up to the NST. You type API beta, companies. Yep. And because we are running on-prem, you can delete all of this stuff. Since this tenant is configured to use the Windows authentication, so I don't need to specify anything. And if I just execute this request, it should return soon. Yep. So this is the quickest way to get up and running. So if you just install your box and you flip this Boolean and use Windows authentication, you can use all the APIs. As you can see, I managed to get the companies back. And if I just fetch one of the company here, and I do a post request. And I just provide a display name here. And I execute it. Yep, it was successful. So just under which company did I run it? I picked first, it's Kronos Canada. It's important to pick the company because otherwise then it's going to end up in a different place. And if I filter here for the name, you can see that my customer got created. And you can also see here that the template should have been applied. So you see we got payment terms code and everything else automatically applied from the template. And because we have a cool templating system in the background, even the dimensions were transferred. Oh, actually they were not, sorry. They should have been transferred as well. So I have a bug in the setup. Sorry for that. Yep, so Anis is going to take over from here and to show you how you can develop your own APIs.
Perhaps I should take this one here. So I'll just take a small sample on how you can build, or how we have built some of the API pages, what property you need to set on the pages, talk a bit into complex type, and give you a short example of how you can make a bound action. And to do that, I will use a box with my favorite tool on. Have it here. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There we are. Yes. And let's see. So I prepared a little example here, trying to build a bank entity, not rich on field, but again, and isn't it just cool that we got this feature in so you can see it bold what I've changed from default, so it's pretty simple to see here. A name, a caption, a page type, reference to a source table, and of course we need to delay insert because we get the full record and therefore we do need to have that property set. And then just specify what is the external OData key that we are using. So that will be the primary key from the external, from calling the API. I have exposed here the standard field number and name. I should have written display name, sorry. And I have what I call here an address JSON. And if I go into the code, so I need to do, when I get my record, I just need to fill in this complex type, and luckily we have componentized and have a way to do that using a library here. So you get the address, address to city, county, country region, postcode, put into a JSON in the standard format we agreed on. I'll show it to you later shortly. Of course, this is when getting. If we also need to, damn, it wasn't down here. We shouldn't have played around. Sit. So you can set it or you can get it. So here, if we need to update it, so if the user have made a post request, it is almost similar. We have a little helper function where we pack it into a JSON and then we can show it in the response and we're all good there. One thing to be aware of, however, if you're using those complex type, that you need to specify on the field a OData EDM type. We have a few available out of the box. EDM, any part. Yeah. But you can also build your own. Oops. Did you warm up the server for me?
Yes.
Thank you. So actually, if you search for this page to see the predefined EDM type that are available, and down here I have the post address, and you can see here how it packs it up and make this this beautiful street address, county, country, as an example. The bound actions, they are equally simple to create. I have it up here. You need to create a function. I think this is the one that I tried here. It just needs to be visible and also have set service enabled to true. Nothing magical there. So in this little sample, I will not run the code here in interest of time. When I evoke this in action, I flip the phone number to something else, do a modify of my record, and then I set the response to this here with the action context, and I actually have it there, where I say the key, the number, and the page. I should have used page, : bank account for the beautiness, but again, it is not magical or complex to implement bound actions. It's just slightly different. And there are good examples inside our NAV 2018. You can just look up the quote or the invoice where you can do make an invoice based on a code and post an invoice. Cool. Super. So let's flip over here too.
Thanks, Hannes. So the last topic that we have for today are design patterns, and we have very little time left on clock. So my apologies, but I'm going to go a bit quicker through them.
Yeah, rapid.
So we prepared 4 of them, and we will also be discussing commonly made mistakes. So when you see this logo, it's a tripping point where many developers have tripped. So an open question for all of you guys: how do you measure code quality? So most likely you have heard many metrics like psychometric complexity, churn per line of code, but the only measure that really matters is the WTF per minute. And you measure it like this. You get the developers in the code, you give them a code flow, and you measure how many times they're going to say like WTF, right? And the good code generates a little, a bad code generates a lot. And this picture is so good that we are using it for the second time. And there are multiple levels of WTF. The first one is what, the second is why, it's in the component level, and the ultimate level is when you're so outraged that you're going to spend your time to figure out who wrote it, right? That's the ultimate level. So we have introduced a couple of WTFs with the OData stack. As you saw, Hannes showed you that it's quite quick to implement an API, but the devil is in the details. So when you hit some APIs, it's going to become hard. So the first pattern is the shadow table, and this table is physically aggregating 2 tables into one. So for all of the sales getters and sales invoice getters, we have duplicated them into the sales invoice getter aggregate. And basically the problem that we are facing is the data is split into 2 tables, and this would force us to split it into 2 APIs, like draft sales invoices and sales invoices. But the flow would be horrible. So first you would have to check if it is in the drafts or is it in the invoices, and if it's not, you should guess it got deleted, right? And basically all of the non-NAV developers would say WTF to us, right? Because no service in the world is doing this. And yeah. Then you guys, when you would start to use this API, you would think it sucks as well, and everybody would agree on that. So simply it was a no-go to split it. First thing that people say when they hear this problem is, let's base it on the temp table. And this is really a horrible idea. It's really a horrible idea. Why? Because you're going to end up in a world of pain if you do that. So never ever base an API call on a temporary table if it can return a large number of data. And we all know that you can have 300,000 invoices in the system. Why? Because of performance. You have to load all the records no matter what. If they are filtering, you have to load all the records. Then continuation tokens, like paging, is going to be really problematic. And filtering together with the continuation tokens is going to be a nightmare. So don't do this. For the sales invoices, it is not okay to base it on the tab, on something which returns a small number of records, like tax setup. It is okay to base it on the temporary table. So we have pre-computed all the values, and we have stored it in the shadow table, and this has also helped us with the performance, because calculations are expensive. 30 milliseconds times 1,000 invoices, it's 30 seconds, in the best case. And like if we are having a bad day, it's going to be 40 or 50 seconds, and no user is going to wait for the API to return. So, and the graph is forcing us to return within 200 milliseconds in most cases. Otherwise, they will move us to the asynchronous API. And you don't want to be in the asynchronous API according to them. They said it to me in such a way that I didn't dare to ask why, right? So we are really aiming not to be over 200 milliseconds. The shadow table works with the global subscribers, so each time when the change happens to the sales header or related records, we just duplicate it into a table that is in the NAV. When you're inserting a record from the API, we are propagating the insert to the main table, and we are exiting with false because we don't want to end up in the loops. We always force the main table to update the aggregate itself. And for the fields, all of the aggregate-specific fields are having numbers larger than 9,000. And this is really cool because now we are not growing SQL row size, which would hit you with your implementations, right? Then you would have to either choose, are you going to implement LS Retail or APIs? So we are putting all of the API-specific fields in a separate table. Yep, so I managed to say this. And be very careful to enforce read permissions, because aggregate is exposing two tables. So on open page, filter it out. Yep, so consist data is duplicated, read permissions are hard, we get performance, not increasing the row side, and we can change the flow from the proxy. So that's really cool. Then the next pattern that we have introduced is a register field set. And just to explain it briefly, here on the left, I'm trying to create a non-taxable customer, and on the right, I'm trying to create any customer. But the problem is that it ends up with the same data set, right? And then the insert trigger will set taxable to both, because it doesn't know what have you specified. And in the first case, it's wrong, because I wanted a non-taxable customer. And in the second case, it is correct. So we couldn't fix this one generically, because in some cases we should throw an error, in some cases we should auto-validate, and in some cases we should enforce the set value. So we need to code. And order of the fields on the API page is very important, because they get validated in this order. So it's not like a regular page. And the solution is that we decorate all the fields with register field set, and then we try to set them back if you have specified it in the request. We had a code review meeting, we all agreed it's a hack, so we are going to get a proper platform solution for this. The next pattern, which is not really that good, is the integration IDs. This is a system which is 3 years old. It's been used for the first CRM integration. And in the integration table, we are storing all of the integration record IDs. So all of these IDs that you saw in the demos are coming from this table. You can search in the object designer, and they're being used for all of the APIs and all of the integrations that we have. And this is not really a good solution. And if you would like to see how it runs, the source point is the code unit 1. And child entities, they don't have an integration ID. They just update the parent. So a sales line will never get an integration ID. The sales record will have an integration ID. And when the record is deleted, we blank the record ID on the table. Never delete the integration records, you're deleting the history, because when you ask the API, we will give you that the record was deleted, and also when you ask for the deltas, we'll use the integration table to tell you which records got deleted in the meantime. So never ever delete the integration records. That's also a mistake that people make. The biggest problem with this system is very fragile. So if somebody deletes the integration records, we have lost the data, and this is not the way to do it. we are also causing locks on the tables, which is harming the performance. So we need to get a proper platform solution for this one, and it's in the queue. And for the last pattern, we have these temporary tables. So basically, if you have few records, you should use the temporary table because it is way simpler to modify. And this is an important consideration. You will see this that we have coded on find record, and you're probably going to be thinking like WTF. And the reason for this is that the web service pages are behaving differently than the regular pages. And currently, the page used to close after an open trigger. So if we would load it on open page trigger, the page would close and reopen, so we would lose everything that we have loaded on temp. But it doesn't close on find record, so we have coded it there. So yeah, also it is in the plans to fix this, so we don't open and close the page multiple times. The OData page can behave differently than the regular page in the future, and it may be by design, because they are serving two different purposes, and the different code gets executed. Yep, and the cons for this approach is that you have to transfer data yourself to the physical tables, and you have to make sure that the data set is small. Yep. So, Anders, should I take this one quickly, or will you?
Yeah, let's take it quickly. Oh, I can just... So I think Nikola earlier said that media right is going into the depot as we speak, so to speak. It will not be in NAV 2018, but in Tenerife for sure. Delta support. Imagine you have fetched all the customers from the service, and now you just want to see, give me what have changed since the last time. That is also being worked on. Webhook, advanced filtering, extensibility of the APIs, the standard APIs, and the capabilities of not only have our namespace, API, but have a namespace called API custom. So you can have your own custom namespace. And then we will add a few APIs, perhaps something around incoming document, Gunnar, if that can please you a bit. With that being said, I think we should jump directly. Should we skip the last 100 slices?
So, yeah, we can skip these.
Yes.
The only slide I would like to show is
Yes.
the last before the end. So, yeah, basically, this is very easy to learn, so start using it. If you don't have, I would really recommend that you learn this. So if you, the next steps, you can get, this is a link to get started with the APIs, and we are really looking for your feedback. So far we have been proactive, now we are switching to reactive mode, and all of the APIs and the addition that we do are going to be based on your feedback. We already got the feedback that on the sales invoice we didn't expose the external document, and it's mandatory in many cases, so we just quickly fixed it. So if you would like any fields or bound actions, make a request and we'll start doing it. We are not adding anything without a specific request. And start building connected apps. Yep, so, questions?
Yippee! Carry on. Is it a good question?
Yep.
Yes.
Can we expect to get a base 64 conversion field in the user card below the current one? Because you converted this with your tool to base 64.
Yeah, that would be a nice to have thing, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
But
we
it
could
would be
do
easier
that, yes.
because otherwise I always have
Yes,
to
we could do
see
that.
and
That's a
just
good
for
suggestion, yes.
copy-pasting and, yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Next question.
Yeah, up here. Whoop. I've seen you down there. Yes.
Hello. Thank you.
We have one in queue.
I was wondering, there's going to be a NAV 2018 in December. That on the roadmap, there's also a NAV 2018 R2. And after that, there was Tenerife for on-premise. Is the API also going to be available in one of these earlier versions, or is it only on Tenerife?
The list that you saw here of APIs available, that's 2018.
Okay.
Yes.
So
That's
in
the short
December,
answer.
we can enable the checkmark.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's, and we have a question there, and then one in behind here.
Sorry.
Yeah. One is will you going to keep supporting SOAP protocol?
Yes.
And another one is like when you
Yes,
post,
I have one up
when
there.
you use the post command, are you going to record the user ID?
Are you going so?
Record the user ID who posted that invoice.
Yes. I mean, like, if the AI logic is doing that, that is going to happen. And if
But
you
it
override
comes
it,
through
then
that,
no.
like if you use a web key,
Mm-hmm.
then how can you record that who posted that particular user?
API is running as the user, right? So if you are doing any logging,
Yeah.
it's going to automatically run. If you are not doing any logging, it's not going to be logged. And it's simple as that.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So,
that's the benefit of running it as a user, right? But it also has the flaws.
Then we have a question
I
there.
want
and
to ask, what will happen now if I create a page in modern development
of you
environment, Visual Studio Code, and use that type API?
You
Will it
cannot do
compile?
that. It will not compile.
Okay. Thank you.
Because, like, if we would allow you to do this, then you would have to have the same SLA as we do, and you would have to go through the graph review. But that's why we are considering introducing a custom endpoint where you could publish your own API pages.
So in the future it will be possible.
Yes, because we are looking into two extension points. One is the custom endpoint, and the second extension point is open types. Sorry. With open types, you can just attach any data to the generic API. So you could post anything, and then maybe in the subscriber you could handle it through the extension.
Thank you.
And then we yes.
Will all the new functionalities like batching
T-shirt.
also be
Hannes,
available
do you
on
have
the
t-shirts? Sorry.
Oh yeah. Patching.
batching?
Yes.
The batch processing, will it be available on the on-prem version as well, or only in the API that you are exposing on the cloud?
Everything will be available both on-prem and in
And-
SaaS. The only thing that differently, that's the endpoint authentication and that stuff. So
Okay. And one other question?
yes.
If we deactivate the API version, the API functionality, will the tables that you have, the aggregation table and the unique ID table, still run, or will they just be deactivated because we don't need them?
So the question was, when you enable the API settings, will everything run? I think if you follow those steps that Nikola explained here, you'll be safe there.
Okay, no, but if we deactivate it, it will not run, right? Like if you wanted to save system resources and we don't need the API, can we deactivate it and then not have the tables run, the aggregation table, for example?
If you activate and all that, the table will run and they will be maintained.
Okay.
Yes.
You have to do something to turn them
Okay,
off, which you can with your little key.
Sorry, we'll also take the Q&A afterwards.
Yes.
So yes, question?
Yeah. So my question is about the post web services. So when we want to write something to the database, like create a record or modify a record, we need to do it field by field, or how exactly? For example, if I
You
want-
just specified. That's a good question, basically. So if you would like to modify multiple fields, you just include them in the JSON, and you push all together to the web service.
Okay,
And
is it
yeah.
going to do the validate for all the fields, or
Yes.
how
So
exactly?
all the fields that you specify in the payload are going to be validated in the order that they are appearing on the page. So that's why the order of the page on the web service, the fields, is important. So when you're coding your own OData v4 service, make sure that the order of the fields is correct.
It is the same as you have a user experience inside NAV. You normally on the order validate from left to right, because otherwise we screwed up earlier. We control this now, but that was the user experience. Yes.
So, one more question. For example, I want to call my, I want to create my own function, action,
Okay.
and I want to call it, but I want to pass some parameter to it.
Yes, it has to be unbound.
Sorry?
It will have to be an unbound action.
So
right?
it has to be a code unit.
Yes, correct.
And to the code unit, I can pass a parameter.
Yes, you publish the code unit. So basically, if you would like to see how the unbound actions look like, we didn't demo them because of the time. You can just simply go to the web services page, see the exposed code unit, and just go into the C side and see it. It's just global functions with the variables on top. So in the function itself, you define the variables, you define the return type, and it gets published as such. And as many functions you have, as many methods you will have exposed.
There's a lot of opportunities. You can also create your magic table and you fit certain set of values inside that. You run this code based on the parameters that was given. So
Okay.
it is
So
only
this is-
imagination that
This is
help.
available only in OData 4?
Yes,
Or
only on
only
data before.
OData 4. And OData 4 is available only in NAV 2017,
So this is available only on NAV 2018.
Okay.
Yes, because you have to take into the consideration when was the platform functionality implemented, right?
Damn. Did you?
So,
Oh, sorry.
yep.
So we have a question here.
Yep.
And
So
yeah, we have one.
The
one more.
question was, is it dependent on the JSON, the direction of the parameters, or on the page?
On the page.
On the page.
On the page.
You can specify whatever you want in the JSON.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter. Yep. Yep. So one more question, and then just approach us, and
Yeah.
then we'll answer everything.
Yes.
Yeah, you showed the downloading of the binary data, and you get, as a result, you get the media link. Is
Yep.
this a dynamically generated link for every?
No, you
is-
can just go to it. I'm not sure if you saw the structure, but
Yeah.
the structure is always the same. So
Okay, so if I have a request for two requests for the same picture, I get
you
the
don't need to do that. Yeah, if you do the two requests for the same picture, you'll get the same picture. So if you know how to construct the URL by yourself,
Okay,
you can by all means do that and go straight
Okay.
to the picture.
and you showed the invoice, the PDF. So was it the actual PDF that was printed when posting?
So the
Or it was just
PDF
in a
is the
field?
one that we generate. So under this API, we would generate it, but basically because we don't store it, so it's the same as clicking print from the posted invoice, right?
Yeah, but then the media link is just temporary because if you just
But the URL is always the same, right?
okay.
so-
Good.
So you're safe on that. Yep.
Good.
So one more question. Okay.
A lot of new material. Is any plan to put together an overall documentation package that's got everything in it, even if it's just online?
So yeah, basically we have shown you two links today. So there is the first one, which is called aka.getstarted, and there is also generic graph documentation that we have. So around all of the APIs that we publish. And there are many articles as well that are covering getting started too.
But is it all, I mean, like the old days used to have these manuals, where we have the equivalent of that online where we have it all together and you can just kind of go through and,
It should be like that, yes.
all right,
Yep, it should be like that. And provide feedback if it is not good enough.
okay.
Yes. Thanks.
It's very impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you all.
Thank you.
And if you have more questions, just come down.
Yeah.